Okay, your recent research, and I think you carried it out with Census Wide, it reveals that I think it's as much as 82% of UK data center operators have actually delayed site builds or expansion due to, I guess, lack of fiber availability. Just
Yes.
tell us how surprising or not that was, and why it matters, if you like.
I think the 82% actually, Philip, was a surprise to me. It wasn't a surprise that it's becoming a more of a concern. The 82% was higher than I thought it might well be. Um, and I think that what we're seeing here is that data centers are, well, the proposed and the planned developments are starting to turn up in not the usual locations, as it were, and therefore the proximity of fiber. So there's availability on two fronts, really. Is there capacity, proximity, to the data center, and then the time to get it there. And that lead time is extending. So I guess that's really what's driving that 82%. But it was a bit higher than I thought, I have to say. But I knew that it was becoming more of a thing due to the conversations we're having as a fiber provider.
Okay, and maybe just one more stat. I think higher than 82, 95% of the same operators saying that access to high capacity fiber networks will now influence their expansions plans. So I guess that's sort of just following on from that further confirmation, if needed, that it's a big issue for them.
It is, yes. And it remains for me what I see and it is, and I've got a bit of data center history as well in my career. That it's still third. So there's no question or statement that, it's first land and then power and then connectivity. But I think that third place, when it had been a distant third, quite a distant third for quite some time, and it's sort of becoming a less distant third. Because if you've got a packet of land in, broadly speaking, the Slough AZ, if you like, or you're taking on a shell from Segra or whoever else, others are available, I guess, um, then you're not really sweating too much on fiber availability. There might be some work to be done, there might be some civils and so on, but at the end of the day, you're not going to be so far away, and therefore in your critical paths and in your budgeting, it's not going to worry the project too much. But as we all know, everybody's chasing two things really. They're chasing more land because these developments are getting bigger, and that power piece. And you've got two aspects to that, of course. One is the getting on the network, and then obviously being able to buy the power. But these some of these sort of brownfield sites, sort of former industrial areas, and so on and so forth, are coming up now. They're also playing into the AI growth zone um, initiatives, and they have less proximity to fiber. And trying to get and with a DC you need to get onto you've got to get onto a large core network as quickly as possible at high capacity, and therefore the amount of money to do that is going up clearly, and the amount of time to be able to achieve that due to the level of civils and getting permits and so on and so forth, and maybe way leaves to cut across land becomes more of an issue, and it becomes a more interesting, I guess, or maybe challenging, take your pick, critical path in the development plan.
Okay, and maybe just finishing that picture, because you talk to the data center operators are clearly important, but also I think you surveyed enterprise IT leaders and local government stakeholders, and
Yes.
I guess they just confirm what the data center folks are saying, that they also have, I think you'd say, registered concern over fiber connectivity. So, what's their sort of take on it, if you like?
Yeah, so I think with some of the players, and in enterprise, the people that are closer to the capacity challenges are going to be those enterprises that really buy a little more like a wholesale. They buy maybe at the fiber or the wavelength level, at which point they're much closer to the availability of high performance fiber and and the right level of capacity. And what is happening is if you've got a high capacity requirement, particularly if the distances are getting longer, and of course, I'm flipping a little back to data centers, but of course, enterprises have, critical masses of data residing in data centers, in LLMs, whatever it might be. Um, then trying to curate, that capacity on an efficient route from A to B, not hopping around in and out of multiple providers, and hopefully the fiber's relatively fresh because you're looking for a long-term agreement on that capacity with a pretty stringent SLA. Curating that capacity over that distance on an efficient route is becoming more and more difficult. So it's not necessarily that suddenly there's a lack of fiber. But depending on the performance requirements, the distance and the capacity, at that end of the equation, it's becoming more challenging to be able to get a fast, effective, low latency, high performance for the long-term solution.
Okay, and if I understand it correctly, the observation is that sort of last mile fiber receives sort of the right amount of attention or a good amount of attention and investment, but the same is not true when it comes to these core fiber networks, which you're talking about. Is that right?
Not well, you're completely right in terms of last mile has had a lot of attention and investment, but that's really filled more in fiber to the premises, which I'm assuming we're both enjoying the connectivity of right now.
Yes.
Assuming that we're in our respective homes, and we've got more than one choice maybe outside our door because, BT have now got competition at a fiber level. So on that side, there's been a vast amount of investment, and as consumers, it's really, for most of us at least, it's never been better. Um, so this access is of a completely different nature because you've got that former brownfield site wherever it might be, and you need to basically you've got your core network and your access into that core network that is less proximate. Going back to the Slough example, for example, or Stockley Park, or take your pick on the areas we all know and love so well. Um, is you got some digging to do basically, um, and that costs money and it takes time, and that's for the ducting, and then you've got and then the fiber's got to go in, and so you've sort of got three levels really of activity there. You need those ducts to go in, that get you back to a core network of provider of some kind. Then the fiber, which would often be also put in by the core network provider that you're going back to. But then once the fiber's in, if it's us putting that fiber in, it doesn't necessarily need to be just us providing the service, because at that point, we do a lot of trade with and cooperate with competitors and partners. And so the services can come from multiple organizations over the infrastructure that maybe we put into one area of the DC, and maybe another provider's digging into the other side of the DC. And if they need four routes, it might be two providers doing that, or it could be even four, maybe. But with the distance, and basically making the investment cases, and finding your two to four connectivity infrastructure partners becomes more of a challenge because there's more money, more time involved, and what do the commercials look like, and so on. So that's a different kind of access. But data centers, generally speaking, they're dealing with people that are going to put in very high fiber count, last mile or last number of miles connectivity into the DC, back to the core.
Okay, and I guess part of the reason for the conversation as well is that everyone's aware of AI is front and center.
Mm,
The world has gone sort of slightly AI crazy, should we say? There's a big
somewhat.
opportunity there, and in the UK at least, much attention on I think the designated AI growth zones.
Yes.
And I guess that in turn means development of more regional AI and data center hubs. You've
Yes.
obviously talked about various places in and around the southeast, but perhaps in the future that's not going to be so important. And as you say, where connectivity there maybe isn't so much an issue, in some of these potential hubs it is. So just yeah, give us some idea of what's going on and the potential bottleneck if things aren't addressed.
Yes. So I think that what we're seeing is, again, these developments, you said there are growth zones, and some of them are popping up above the line a bit more now. but there are also local authorities in particular who have these brownfield sites who are trying to make a case for the cash, the funding to develop them. They come to people like us, and we're engaged with a number who are looking to make that case. Um, and so, I mean, there's bottlenecking of time, I guess, so to speak, particularly, and that's where we people on my side of the equation have to have a few options up our sleeve to try and make that happen and reduce that time to get that connectivity on board. And it really would depend on, so the sort of inflection point here is for a DC developer in their project plan is it's always sort of what one you assess and you pick a development site based on a number of obvious attributes, I guess, to most of the people that would be listening to this. Um, and then your sequencing in terms of spending your money, the timing of spending that money, and obviously the duration of getting the energy on, getting the connectivity in, and obviously getting the building up. Um, and that's where we need to bring options that somehow fit, hopefully, you know they're not the longest pole in the tent, as the phrase often is on projects, that somehow we're able to be up and ready and running, ahead of that facility being energized. And that's our job. And therefore, what are those options that are available to us to be able to get to back into the core network? And we need to find the most efficient and effective and least cost routes. So we have a few options. I can only speak for us. I mean, one of them that's a new option for us, which is rather exciting, is our long-term agreement with Network Rail to be able to utilize the trackside infrastructure to lay new fibre, and then our ability to break out really wherever we need to break out, which is basically with the greatest proximity to a development site, and then drive that very efficient and effective route to the data center, hopefully through you're looking for the shortest distance obviously, but then you're also looking for the least resistance in terms of permission and the most cooperative people to engage with to make that happen. So that's the part we need to play. We have conversations at every stage really of the process, but I've got some history with some of the real estate folks out there in DC land. So, we make sure that they're aware of, the attributes that we could bring to a development site, then with the developers, and then of course data center owners and operators alike, so we keep ourselves connected with the full chain, the full supply chain, or if you like, the full ecosystem.
And I guess therefore is the existing fiber network infrastructure sort of ready for this growth phase, linked into what it is companies like yourself are doing to link in new developments, or is there any worry that even the sort of the current network is maybe going to need some kind of upgrading to cope with anticipated expansion?
We're certainly seeing some challenges on some major routes. And your major routes really are sort of north to south or south to take your pick which direction, but depending on your bias, I guess.
Mhm.
And then east west, particularly east west in the south. And this is because you've got a lot of data actually entering the country from overseas. You've got those big clusters up in the Nordics, for example, but there's a lot coming in transatlantic, and that's increasing. Um, we pretty much know that AI is driving a percentage of that, just from the nature of the underlying customers, and the conversations that we have with the providers that we partner with to enable them to then hand that data off to us into our core and then bring it to its core destinations within the United Kingdom. The other thing that's in play, I mean, there's quite a bit of subsea activity in upgrading subsea cables. And with those, again, if you're going to spend, these vast sums of money putting very performant, fresh, best of breed subsea cable down, you want that to meet something that's going to be able to complement the performance and the longevity. And there are a few challenges there. So we're in conversations there to look at, seeing how we can maybe complement that and meet up with those landing stations and those partners. And then, that data then will come in and there's vast payloads that will be coming from data centers elsewhere to then land in data centers here. Whether it's an LLM to inference, maneuver, I don't really necessarily know, or it could be LLM to LLM, maybe potentially. But the only thing I can tell you is, the requirements are going up, and the demand for multiple fibers with good longevity for high performance over time is increasing. And so between us, we've got to get ahead of that curve. We have a few options on that. I mentioned the trackside option before. Um, so if we're looking at if we're looking at something that needs fiber that's more fresh than we have already, and available, which is perfectly good for a number of things, but for particular applications, and hey, we will use that option, and we'll get them onto a new build or a build that's already in progress.
Okay, and you mentioned there inferencing, because obviously the
Mm,
current sort of focus is on the large language models, the
mm.
training, the huge uh, quantity of data that's being processed in various places. When the inferencing comes along, as I understand it, the edge, which has been talked about for quite a while and perhaps never
Yes.
quite arrived as people expected, but the suggestion is that obviously the AI inferencing will maybe be that killer app that means the edge. So is there another challenge there in developing, more localized fiber for all those potential edge data centers as and when they arrive?
I think there could be. I think this is where, though, we've got that question that everybody's looking for the answer to, which is, what is Edge going to look like? And I think it's fascinating, and I don't know, you will be so much better read than I am on this, but I sort of consume a reasonable amount of content on this, and you've got to be mindful of the who's creating the content and maybe their agenda clearly.
Yeah.
um, but not that I'm throwing any accusations out there, but so you sort of put a lens on, and and I read somewhere, and I cannot remember the source, but you have these sort of potentially 10 megawatts needed wherever there's a population cluster of something quite low, and you're looking at the DC capacity to per head of population. You're thinking, I think that's probably a little punchy. But but there is no doubt that there will need to be a greater level of distributed compute, in any country but here, than there is right now, in order to maintain quality of service and immediacy of service and response, for users of applications that have increasing amounts of AI capability embedded, let alone, I mean, we can talk about Chat GPT and Copilot, etc., where you're interacting with that, physically, knowingly, prompting and so on. But much more of this is going to be buried in tools, of course, that we're using, and making them, super powerful compared to how they are now. And some of those deployments will be incredibly latency sensitive, I guess. And I think the other one is, and but it's here, but maybe a little bit out there, still, is with cars. And you can read some statistics on the amount of data that's basically the data flow between a car and one, I assume, the manufacturer's, sort of central, compute base somewhere. Um, and with the advent of autonomous driving, what that looks like and when, who knows? But you can imagine that the dependency for full autonomous driving to be able to operate will be on probably some level of live connection. Otherwise, it's going to hand the wheel back to you. So those things will all kick in. I think that the 100K population cluster and X amount of capacity to reside within one of those to service this requirement. Where does that fall? Is it 100K? I don't think it's 10 megawatts. Um, and actually, when you look at the UK, and I did some research, partly aided by AI, I have to admit, that showed the population clusters of that nature. There's something, in the region of 70 of them in the United Kingdom. And that's a large number. So if inference is placed with serious amounts of compute in 70 locations in the UK, that's a massive undertaking. But back to your point on connectivity, I think we're in an interesting position where we do quite a lot of backhaul for these altnets that have done great work in bringing us all an uplift in connectivity to our home. And which means actually, we've got infrastructure that can pick up quite large amounts of data from towns, towns that are not the major cities, basically. So one way or the other, I think we've got a few answers to that. There are some very blue sky projects out there. They're all under NDA as you'd expect, with people are ideating and starting to build investment theses around this. Um, and broadly speaking, it's the opportunity I think will come over time. I still, even with those, haven't quite got a take on the shape or the size of it, but it will be more distributed than it is today, without a doubt. And we've got a few edge players out there today, but I think it will be more distributed than today. 70 locations with serious levels of compute, I'm not so sure.
I suppose, I guess that again, there's probably a degree of uncertainty, but have you got some idea of what needs to happen to make sure that the excitement around AI and the AI opportunity for the UK is not, shall we say, restricted? I know there's always a bottleneck, somebody's
Mm,
slower than somebody, whether it's the compute, the network, the
yeah.
storage, but for the fiber networks to be, if you like, not the guilty party, what needs
Yeah.
to happen, if you like?
Yeah, I think, we need to when we need to put new infrastructure down, um, and if we're looking also to maybe put that on new efficient routes, then I don't imagine that we're going to get to a point where maybe pick a bad example, but if you're at a government level and you've got a massive infrastructure project, so HS2 is an example. I mean, you can basically go and acquire people's homes and and make them move their businesses, and you can just literally move everything out of the way. So it's quite an extreme example. I don't imagine that laying fiber is ever going to get to the point where it can wield that level of power. That said, what would be good to see is uh, something that enables us to have local authorities where we're looking to be able to close a road, etc. Everybody hates that, I appreciate, but when we need to get it in the ground, and it's something that involves, a local authority, broadly speaking, the government, then having faster reaction times and more coordination so that we can get on with that project and just make it happen super quick would be really useful. You then do come across a lot of private, individuals that you need to interact with to get way leaves and access, and I don't think we're going to get anything, some sort of superpowers, granted by the authorities for that. I don't imagine that happening, to be honest. So we're just going to have to find, we're going to have to make sure that we find, the fastest, efficient, most efficient routes possible that are the easiest to gain permission, um, and so that we can basically match the ambition, hopefully, and the growth of this AI opportunity with the speed to build and upgrade and feed it with the connectivity it needs. And that's I think that's what we need. And I know that there was an article recently. I do need to still read it, to be honest, but I know that there's a government level eye back on telecommunications with a from the critical infrastructure perspective. And I know this sort of happened with data centers about 3 years ago or so, if I remember rightly. And so I can see connectivity maybe moving up the stack a bit in terms of the importance of the criticality of it and how that then is viewed by the government, and the positive impact and potentially the negative impact that it could have on the nation, and that it can help drive growth, it can help drive productivity. It's way down in the stack of enablement there, of course, but it's deeply fundamental, much like energy, you know. So I think we're going to end up sort of in that category probably over the coming years.
Yeah, and I suppose the final question then would be, are you optimistic that what you've described that needs to happen will happen in the right time frames to enable this AI expansion, or do you have even vague concerns that the sort of bureaucracy around it might not be helpful, shall we say?
Well, my answer to that would be, I hope it's not a non-answer, by the way, Philip, but my answer to that would be is we're here basically to innovate and work around a lack of momentum elsewhere. So if we get it and we get the oxygen and the help, brilliant. Thank you very much. Take everything you give us. But we're here also to figure it out collectively and severally and innovate and put our thinking caps on because we're here to make it happen. We just have to find the way. If we can get some help, we can get a leg up from the powers that be. Brilliant. And maybe sort of going back to that potential for connectivity being reviewed in terms of its criticality to the future of the country and the development of the economy and the growth of the economy, maybe we'll get a bit more help. So I'm hopeful on that side, but the bit that I am in control of, along with my cohorts, because we work together, is we're going to innovate the hell out of whatever we can and ideate around it to make it happen, irrespective of what gets in the way, because we have no choice.